Hello BookTube, my name is Elizabeth. Welcome or welcome back to my channel, Book as in Books. In this video, I want to talk about two books that I read recently. These are both non-fiction, but they are very different non-fiction. One of them is a memoir about learning a second language, and the other one is a work of history about Vichy France, well, the trial of Marshal Pétain. And both of them were just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. I recommend them both. So, well, if you want the express version of this video, I suppose you can stop watching now. If you want more details, keep listening. So, as I said, the first one I want to talk about is In Other Words by Jhumpa Lahiri, and it is translated from Italian by Ann Goldstein. I'm just going to check to make sure. I just want to check to make sure where's the first page. Translated from the Italian by Ann Goldstein, indeed. You may know the name Lahiri, winner of the Pulitzer Prize. You may think, why does she need translation? That's exactly what she is explaining in this book. In this book, she talks about her passion for the Italian language and how consuming it became, and how much she wanted to learn that language, to the point that she moved to Rome with her family just to be completely immersed in the language and to be able to master it. And in this book, she talks about her journey learning the language and also her journey as a writer in the Italian language. And I loved the book. I loved every time that she talked about the difficulties of learning a second language, and not just the idea of learning grammar and vocabulary and all of that, but learning how to be confident in using it, the limits that you face when you're dealing with a second language, and I sympathize with that so much. This impression that you may have once in a while of knowing exactly what you want to say and being unable to say it, even though you have words in your own language, but in this other language, the words simply will not come, and you end up stuttering, and then you end up saying something a bit stupid because it's really not what you meant to say, or it's not the exact nuance, or it doesn't sound as nice as if you had said it in your own language. But at the same time, if you want to learn the language, you have to take chances. It's impossible to learn a language and having it perfectly the first time. Well, there might be some exceptions, some exceptionally brilliant people who manage to do that. But for the average person, such as myself, the second language is a bit of a straitjacket sometimes. So every time she talked about that, I thought it was, yeah, that's it. I understand. That is exactly what I'm living through. Also, she talks about the idea of belonging, the links between language and identity and culture and community, and how learning a language does not necessarily mean that you will belong to that language. In the case of Lahiri, Italian is not in fact her second language, it's her third, at least. Her mother tongue is actually Bengali, even though she never really lived in India. I think maybe for a few months, but she never lived in India, so she never had to speak Bengali with anyone other than her parents. Of course, a few social occasions here and there, but basically she learned her mother tongue with her family, and that mother tongue was not spoken by anyone outside the home. When she went to school, she learned English, and she did her entire scholarity in English, and her social life was in English, and she became an English writer. Oh, I remember, Italian is not her second language. She studied Latin and Greek at university, so she's a classicist. I don't know if she speaks these languages, but she can read them at the very least. But anyway, at some point, she speaks about, at various points, she speaks about this idea of a mother tongue. What does it mean? What does it mean to belong? And of course, in her case, it's a question of racism, because more than once in Italy, she is asked where she comes from, when her husband, who does not speak Italian any better than her, is considered as a true Italian. She never is, and she sort of kind of realizes that for many people, she could never be considered Italian. She would always be a foreigner. And she reflects on that, what it means to belong to a community. What does it mean to be a foreigner? She thinks of her mother, who is a poet in Bengali, but who lived in English, who had to live in English for so long. And these are very, very thoughtful and very, I'm tempted to say profound thoughts, and I enjoyed this book. So if you have any interest in languages in Italy, I feel like memoirs in general, I would highly recommend the book. And also it's very short, so it is officially 233 pages, but it is in fact half of that, because on the right side you have the Italian, and on the, well, it's the left side, sorry. On the left side you have the Italian, and on the right side you have the translation. Once in a while I did look at the Italian and I was thinking, I can read that, and then I would continue to say, no, I cannot read that. And anyway, it's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I recommend it to everyone. The second book, I recommend it also to everyone, but more specifically if you like to read history. And now there's a prize for history, which is called the Goodhill Prize. And it is supposed to reward, I didn't check on the website the exact words, but basically it means original research, so research in original archives, that is presented in a very readable way. And to my mind, this book screams Goodhill Prize. That is this type of book that I want to see in the Goodhill Prize. So I don't know how the nominations work. So this book was published at the end of 2023. I think it would be in the period for the prize, but I don't know if it's going to be nominated at all, but I'm thinking this is the type of book that I would like to see as a finalist for a history prize. History meant for the general public, not for historians, but for the general public. So Julian Jackson is a British historian, and he dug in the archives to present us the trial of Marshal Pétain. In case you don't know, Pétain during World War II was at the head of, we'll call it France, Vichy, more precisely. The capital was moved to Vichy because the north of France was occupied by the Germans, but the south of France was governed by the French. And that was the French Republic headed by Marshal Pétain. However, it was not the Republic in the constitutional sense that it had been until the war, because Marshal Pétain decided to fire every minister and to govern in some sort of special constitution. Basically, he made himself a dictator. Whether he realized it or not, that's what he did. And that was a question of his trial. Basically, did he know what he was doing? And what he was doing, was it treason or not? Because the trial of Pétain, it happened after World War II. There was a string of trials after World War II. You probably know the trials at Nuremberg, and then there were trials at Tokyo, and there probably were trials in every country where Germany occupied the territory. There probably were trials everywhere. The particularity of the trial of Marshal Pétain is that the trial was instigated and run by people from the same nationality. It was not the Americans or the British or the Russians who held the trials. It was France who held the trial of Marshal Pétain. So that's the first particularity. And the second particularity, compared to these other trials of Nuremberg and Tokyo and all of that, is that crime against humanity was not quite yet invented, because the trial of Pétain happened during the summer of 1945. So what he was being accused of was not, it was not the crimes of the Germans of Germany. It was the fact that he had surrendered France to Germany. He was accused of treason. So that was the one and only charge against him. It was treason. So not crime against humanity, and not being a dictator, or not having ordered the death of anyone, because I don't think he signed any death order. He just left it to ministers and other people to say, oh yes, here's I don't know, here's this German directive, apply it please, or something like that. So he never, it's not like Stalin, who signed I don't know how many thousands of death sentences. Pétain never did that. But he was accused of treason. So that meant that the trial, in large part, was political, because the decision to surrender, to a large extent, is a political decision. And then the way you decide to run your government after the surrender is political. So for a lot of people, this was a political trial. It was the victor trying the defeated. It was the personal revenge of de Gaulle against Pétain, because the two men knew one another. At some point, de Gaulle did work for Pétain. De Gaulle was a great writer, Pétain was not, and de Gaulle at some point was the ghostwriter of a book that Pétain wanted to write. It was never published, so de Gaulle published it himself in the 1930s, like 10 years later, and then there was bitterness between the two men. So a lot of people were thinking, well, it's just de Gaulle getting his revenge and all of that. Anyway, so this book is telling us, is revisiting the trial of Marshal Pétain. And the book is in three parts. The first part is what happened before, so the context, and then the middle part, which is the most important, is the trial itself. So Jackson takes us back in the courtroom. He gives vivid descriptions that the witnesses are speaking in front of us, and then we have also the comments by the journalists. Oh, that's the other thing that struck me in the book. The journalists at the time in France, oh my God, there was Camus, who was a journalist. He covered the trial, though not directly. He was using other people's either transcriptions or descriptions. He was commenting on the trial, but he was not necessarily covering the trial. So there was Camus, there was François Mauriac, Georges Bernanos, Joseph Kessel. It was amazing. The journalism in 1945 in Paris, it was awesome. And Julian Jackson quotes a lot Madeleine Jacob, another one that really has a nice, in French we say avoir une belle plume, so a nice quill, who has a nice style, who writes really well. And yeah, so that's the second part. And then in the third part, we see the Jackson comes back, like the consequences of the trial and how much it had consequences for the entire 20th century, because a lot of people wanted to revisit the trial. So even though it finished in 1945, it wasn't really finished. So it's sort of like the case was always open, even though officially it was closed. Because another reason why the trying Marshal Pétain was so difficult is that in World War I, he was a hero. And in World War II, he turns out to be this horrible dictator who is fostering anti-Semitic policies and having people killed and tolerating a whole bunch of things that are intolerable. And anyway, so this trial was very interesting. And I also loved the way Julian Jackson wrote it. I'm going to read to you just a couple of sentences that I thought were just, like I said, he made the trial very alive in front of us. So there's this witness who is Jean Berthelot, Vichy's Minister of Communication. He oozed the sleek self-satisfaction of professional fonctionnaires who were self-righteously convinced they had nothing to apologize for. So I thought that was particularly well written. And then, speaking of a future French president, well, at the time he was president, I'm going to give you a bit of a description. Narcissistic, devious, imperious, and slippery personality. Which French president is that? Could be a bunch of them, right? It could be a bunch of them. But it was more particularly François Mitterrand, who for a long time hid the fact that he had worked for Vichy, very briefly, but he hid that, even though it was rather known because everybody knows everyone in political circles. And also it kind of shows that everyone had a skeleton in their closet in France. Everyone had something terrible happen during World War II. Nobody, or almost nobody, had a completely clean slate. I'm sorry, and that's another difficulty that is shown at the beginning of the book when it's time to set up a trial, a court to try Marshal Pétain. How do you find someone who is going to be neutral? How do you find judges and prosecutors who had nothing to do at all with the government of Vichy or occupied France, the northern part of France, who had nothing to do with the Germans? You find one who retired quite a long time ago, and then again, at some point you figure out that, oh, he participated in that particular thing, because it was almost unavoidable. If you had any type of professional activity, your hands got dirty, regardless of what you did in life. Even if you were just a school teacher, you had to teach your children to respect and honor Marshal Pétain. So you kind of were stuck. So that was one of the difficulties. So Mitterrand was involved in one way with Vichy, and at some point it became public, and he decided to give an interview. And at that point he was very sick, and he knew that he was about to die, though I don't think, again, he was a very secretive person, so it was not generally known how sick he was. So Jackson is reflecting on that interview. Perhaps as he neared the end of his life, this narcissistic, devious, imperious, and slippery personality was trying to remain faithful to the young man he had once been, gazing out of the fetid courtroom at the clear blue sky, animated by contempt for the ghosts of pre-Vichy France, re-emerging from the wreckage to claim their rights, feeling indifference, perhaps pity, for the old man in the armchair, and dissolving his responsibility into a wider collective culpability. So, the entire book is super well written, and so Jackson writes well, and whenever he quotes anything from the original sources, it's also very well written, because as I said, apparently everyone in France in the 1940s knew how to write extremely well. Even the politicians, even the jurors, everyone seemed to have just this amazing writing style that is so enjoyable, even though they're writing about horrible things such as collaboration with Nazi Germany. There's a bunch of documents that I now want to read. Like, I've never read the memoirs of Charles de Gaulle. Perhaps it's a bit long, but I'm pretty sure I would find them interesting. So de Gaulle is quoted a lot. And then there was one, it's a juror, he's a juror. I really want to read his diary. He wrote a diary during the war, so not after. Like, de Gaulle wrote his memoirs after his political career, or in the middle of it, but he wrote it after the event. So to a certain extent, there might be an agenda hidden in the, or not hidden, but that there might be reasons not to say the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But there's one juror called Léon Werth, so W-E-R-T-H, who wrote his diary day to day, and he absolutely hated Pétain. And I want to read his diary because he knew how to write, and perhaps also Jackson just picked the few nice sentences in the entire thing. Perhaps it's like 500 pages and they're just 3 good sentences and they're in the book. It's not impossible, but I doubt it. I think it would be interesting. So now I want to read that. And I think they are available somewhere on the internet in French, not in English. These types of diaries, they're not always translated. De Gaulle's memoirs will be translated, like Churchill's are translated in French, but the diaries of resistance or just ordinary people living in France during World War II, chances are these will not be translated. But anyway, all of this to say that I enjoyed this book so much. I read it in like 3 or 4 days. And I'm late to bring it back to the library. There's a whole bunch of people waiting for it. So that's why I'm filming this video, so that I can bring the book back to the library. So that's an excellent book that I hope makes it to the final of the Kindle Prize. At the very least, I hope that the editor, the publisher, nominated it, because I went to check how does a book gets nominated for the Kindle Prize, because I would have nominated it, but of course I cannot do that. It's the publishers who nominate books, and they have to send copies, a number of copies, so that the judges can read it. But anyway, so that's my vote for one of the best books written in 2023, books of history for large public, going back to the archives, treating original material and presenting it in a super interesting way. So there you go. That's an excellent book. And that's it. So let me know in the comments if you've read either of these books, or if you read something similar, or on the similar topic, because these are topics that I like and I would like to read some more books on that. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching, and I will see you in the next video. À la prochaine!